morning. There's this pivotal moment in that iconic cult movie Blues Brothers where Jake has been released from prison and he and his brother Elwood picks him up and says, we've got to go and see, we've been summoned to see the Penguin. The Penguin is Sister Mary Stigmata, who is the head of the orphanage that they've grown up in. And she's demanded to see them. So they drive to the orphanage, and in her office she speaks of her disappointment in these boys and their criminality and their life of crime, and oh, what a disappointment. And then she speaks about her own woes, that the orphanage requires $5,000 in property tax or it will be closed down. The diocese can't pay it and will close it down. Where's she going to get this money? And Jake says, we can find you the money, we'll get you the money. And she chastises and rebukes them. No, I will not take your criminal money, your dirty money, your life of crime. No. And there's a to and fro, and they swear at her and she beats them up with a ruler, and anyway they escape. And they go down and see the janitor who's obviously been their ally through the years there. And they talk with him and then share this problem, but they can't close the orphanage. This is home, this is where you work, this is where you live. What are we going to do? And he says, well, go down and see Reverend Cleophas James at the Triple Rock Baptist Church. Surely he's got a message for you. So one Sunday they rock up to this church in the middle of a field, an old weatherboard church, and in they go, and there's the people gathering, mainly African American people. The choir's in place and the musicians are warming up. And then Reverend James comes out and he's got his robes and gowns on and his sing-song voice, and he lets go and he starts singing, and the choir's singing, the call response is going backwards and forwards, and then the band rocks on and plays louder and louder, and the people are dancing in the aisles, and Jake and Elwood are up the back of the church waiting for this message, waiting for whatever's going to happen. When all of a sudden this beam of light shines in through the stained glass window, this beam onto Jake and lights him up. And he's stunned. In a moment he says, I've seen the light, and starts dancing around and doing cartwheels down the aisle and dancing, and Elwood joins in with him. And when they leave, Jake says, I've seen the light. We've got to get the band back together. We're on a mission from God. And that becomes the line. And so the next bit of the movie is them getting this band that's dispersed and gone to other jobs and other places and wants nothing more to do with the Blues Brothers. Getting them back together. But you got to, because we're on a mission from God. We're going to save the orphanage. We're on a mission from God. And it's this strange kind of several moments in the movie, this cult, sacrilegious kind of movie, almost a parody of enlightenment, conversion or whatever, a parody of the truth that actually reveals a deeper truth, that these strange guys receive a vocation, a calling, and they pursue it through the movie, and they save the orphanage. It's not, in some ways it's not much different from hearing the story of the ancient Hebrew people. This Moses, an enigmatic character who is cast aside by his parents at the royal decree and left floating in the Nile, and found by the Pharaoh's daughter and claimed as her own, and takes him back and is raised in the royal household, and then he's caught in adult life between the cultures, knowing he belongs to the Hebrew people but only knowing Egyptian culture. And he sees a Hebrew slave being beaten by an Egyptian, and he fights the Egyptian and kills him, and discovers he's been found out, so runs and hides in the wilderness, the mysterious places, the dangerous places, the safe places. And there he finds his wife to be, and they marry, and he goes and they have a child, and he gets work with his father-in-law, tending sheep. tending sheep in this wilderness world. And one day he sees this bush on fire but not being burned up. And he goes off the path to get a closer view. And it's on the holy mountain of God. And he hears this voice out of this burning bush. Moses, this is holy ground, take off your shoes. So he kneels and takes off his sandals, and he's confronted by this voice. Who are you? I am the God of your fathers and mothers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And there's this to and fro. Moses, I've heard the cries of my people in Egypt, the slaves and the persecution, the oppression and the suffering. I'm going to go and release them. And Moses probably thinking, yeah, good idea. About time, God, go for it. And Moses, I want you to go. I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go so they can worship me on this holy mountain. Sure thing, God. Yep. I can't do that. Look at me. I'm a man on the run. I'm wanted. I'm nobody. What could I do? But God won't take no for an answer, and everything that Moses throws back, God has an answer for. And in the end, Moses says to him, well, they're going to ask me who sent me. Who are you? What's your name? Having a name over someone has some sort of measure of definition of control. It's like we name people, categorise people, put them into boxes. Who is your name? And God says, I am who I am. I will be who I will be. You'll know me as you trust me. Just tell them I am sent you. That's it. Go. It feels like a parody on reality that reveals the truth, especially when it's in the mouth of Charlton Heston in that movie, The 10 Commandments. It's like Bruce Almighty, this person who confronts God and demands God do what God's supposed to be doing and has this interaction. Or Evan Almighty, a similar sort of story. Parodies of the truth that reveal the truth in a deeper way. And in all these stories, there becomes vocation and calling and life and enlightenment and way, which seems odd and strange and fantastic, and yet it is what it is. It is those moments of insight, of inspiration, of conversion, of enlightenment, call it what you like. The moment on the daily walk when I'm wrestling with the past or the issues of the future, or worrying about what might be, and the parrot flies past and squawks and disturbs my reverie, and I look up and I see a world, and suddenly the past and the future don't seem so important, but there's a moment now to live and to be and to see the connections and the beauty and the wonder, and to be drawn into something deeper. It might be listening to the story of another person or a story on the news where I'm drawn out of my own little world into something deeper and more profound and darker. And I feel the sense of calling. You've got to go and do something. It's like the story of Malala, that young girl from Afghanistan who was denied education, the opportunity of education that her brothers and other males around her got. And she wanted to learn, to go to school, and she wasn't allowed. And in a moment of anger and desperation and frustration and whatever else, she cries out to the world that this is wrong, and speaks out. The powers that be, the male-dominated society of the Taliban, comes at her with guns. But the world hears and responds. Or even Greta Thunberg, when she first spoke out, this young, somewhat naive perhaps, teenager who heard what the scientists were saying and looks at the world that she loves, the world that will be hers and her children's and her children's, and she's hearing the stories of how the warming is changing the earth, and we have to do something. And in a young, profound naivety, speaks out. In that moment of insight, and I've got to say something. And the world listens. And young people are embraced into the student strike movement, where adults say, oh, tut tut, they should go to school and what's this nonsense? And yet what they're saying is we have to do something. We see the need. We've had a moment of inspiration, revelation. We can do this, and we need to. And I guess in all these stories that we read throughout the Hebrew stories of Scripture and other stories of faith, Christian stories, Muslim, anyone, secular stories, where people have a moment of insight. It might be that waking moment or that moment before waking early in the morning where the REM sleep and the light sleep and the wakefulness or subconscious interact and the dreams are there. And the thing we've been wrestling with becomes into clear sight, and we know the answer, and we find the way through. It might be just being loved into life, and suddenly realising that there's a different way in the world, and we're called into it to be who we can be. And I think in Matthew's story of Jesus, this is the kind of thing that Jesus is talking about with his disciples. With Peter, he says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to south to Jerusalem, and there I'll be arrested and tried by the religious people and handed over to the Romans, crucified, die, and I'll rise on the third day. And Peter, who has just named him as Messiah, says, no, that's not the story. You don't understand Jesus. And in his mind is the status quo, is the story of culture and people and expectation and longing for a return to the glory days where Israel was a great nation under King David, a warrior king who led the armies and routed the enemies. And that's what the people hoped would happen with the Messiah and Rome and restoring Israel to its former glory. And Jesus says, no, Peter, your words are not the words of God, they're words of humans. You're speaking the devil's language, not mine. Get behind me. And he goes on to say, those who want to follow me, be my disciple, live into this new way, must deny themselves. Let go of self and its expectations, its pride, its ego, its need to be in control and to own and define and grasp and accumulate. You need to let go, because then you'll find your true self. You'll find yourself in this one God. You'll find who you are and your calling, your vocation and your life. That's what I'm inviting you into. And those who follow this way, who take up their cross, who let go, will find the true self, the vocation, the life, the calling. And I think in a real sense, the Blues Brothers find a vocation. It would not be named like that, but they find their calling to save this orphanage and to do it the best way they can with the gifts and skills they've got. Bruce Almighty finds his life, bringing hope and joy to people. Evan Almighty does a good thing, acts of kindness that make a difference. Moses finds that when he lets go of his fear, his need to control, when he trusts this one who calls him, this mystery, there's a strength and a power, and something happens despite him, through him. And there is freedom and life. And you and I are invited into this way of life, to trust in God, to hear the call, to let go, and to follow in the way of Jesus. Amen.